Hello, dear viewers of my video. I hope you enjoy watching it and look forward to your feedback in the comments. They fired me at 8:06 a.m. Not 8 Nama, not 8:15. 8:06. I remember the exact second the words left Quinla Brexworth's mouth. Cold, precise, devoid of anything resembling humanity. "The project is completed," she said, flipping a page on her clipboard. As if I were a defective circuit board she was cataloging for disposal. "We no longer require your services." That was it. No thanks. No explanation. Just those 9 words. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, nodded, and tucked the strap of my laptop bag over my shoulder. I didn't say a single word because the moment those words were spoken, something far bigger than Quinla's ego had already been set in motion. Failsafe. The word itself doesn't sound like much, but it was everything. The code I had embedded in our infrastructure wasn't malicious. It wasn't even technically destructive. It was protective. A ghost protocol that only activated if one condition was met: that I was no longer part of the system. I had created it during one of those long, bitter nights when the fluorescent lights above my workstation felt more like interrogation bulbs than office lighting. I was a client relationship coordinator, but that title barely scratched the surface. In truth, I was the quiet architect behind Peton Analytics' survival. The reason our clients stayed. The reason they trusted us. But people like Quinla never saw that. To her, I was inefficient. Too soft, too slow, too human. So I gave her exactly what she wanted. Silence. As I walked through the glass-paneled corridor, past the faces that wouldn't meet my eyes, I felt an eerie calm settle in my chest. I didn't need to fight for recognition. I didn't need to shout, because Failsafe was already awake. Failsafe didn't delete anything. It didn't corrupt or steal. That would have been beneath me. Instead, it revoked access. Quietly, elegantly, precisely. Every client note, every customized analytics sequence, every embedded protocol I had written, slipped into digital quarantine. Not destroyed, just gone. Until I returned, which I never would. At exactly 8:14 a.m., I stepped outside. The fall air was crisp, biting at the edge of my breath. My phone buzzed once, a silent notification. Failsafe active, system partition secured. And by 8:22 a.m., the cracks started forming. It began with a harmless login error. Then, a sync failure in the East Division. Then, a cascade of missing fields in the client dashboards. Tempest Living Well's entire client portal failed to load. Roderick Yates' inventory model reverted to a blank slate. The interfaces were intact, but the heart was missing. What Quinla never understood was that my work wasn't just about numbers and spreadsheets. I had woven myself into the system. Every relationship, every follow-up, every late-night email with a personal touch. It was all me. They thought they were deleting documentation. They were deleting me. And the moment I was gone, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. Collapse. So I walked. Not fast. Not scared. I passed the glass lobby, where a receptionist tried not to look at me. I pushed open the door, stepped into the street, and kept walking. At 8:29 a.m., I ordered a cappuccino from a corner cafe. At 8:31, my phone buzzed again. Marlowe Partners. Incoming call. I didn't answer yet. I sipped my drink. Let it settle. Because Quinla Brexworth thought she had cut out a liability. She had actually just triggered the one person holding everything together to vanish. With dignity, yes. But also with every key that mattered. And they were about to learn just how far a well-built failsafe could reach. Before the collapse. Before the panic. Before that cold 8:06 a.m. dismissal. There was only me. A borrowed desk in a storage room that smelled faintly of printer toner and forgotten ambition. That's where it all began. They didn't even give me a real office. Just a converted file room with one working outlet and a flickering ceiling light that buzzed when the heat kicked in. Most days I wore headphones without music just to silence the hum, but I didn't care. That room, with its scratched-up folding chair and second-hand monitor, was where I built the system. My system. The framework that would become the spine of Python analytics. Not that anyone knew it at the time, not even me. It started as a tool to automate follow-ups, a simple script to log client calls and flag inconsistencies. But soon, the pattern spoke to me. I saw links others missed, how a delayed reply from a client often correlated with decreased service satisfaction, how early outreach before renewals raised the odds of contract retention by 67%. I didn't just track data, I understood it. So I built something smarter. I called it SIREN, Strategic Intelligent Relationship Engagement Network. Not that anyone ever used the name. To them, it was just the client dashboard, or Giovanna's notes. But it was never just notes. It was sentiment mapping, predictive loyalty scoring, behavioral engagement clustering. I trained it, tweaked it, and hand-coded fallback scripts in Python when the mainframe overloaded. At one point, I remember staying in that room for 31 straight hours, living on granola bars and vending machine coffee. When it finally worked, when Siren could detect churn risk before the client even hinted at dissatisfaction, I cried. Not dramatically, quietly, the kind of tears that slip out when you're too tired to stop them. I brought it to my supervisor the next day. Her name was Tamsin Everly, and she smiled in that tight, impatient way that meant she wasn't listening. She nodded, skimmed the top lines of my report, and said, "I'll forward this to DevOps. Good work." That was the first time I saw it happen. By the next all-hands meeting, Tamsin was demoing the system, my system, as part of a collaborative departmental effort. No mention of the storage room, no mention of me, just buzzwords about innovation and automation, while I sat 3 rows back, clapping with the rest of the team. The erasure was slow at first. A missed mention in a status update. A skipped name on the email CC. I told myself it didn't matter, that the work spoke for itself. But work doesn't speak when people refuse to hear it. I stayed late every night, patching bugs no one acknowledged, updating modules that mysteriously got rebranded as Core Analytics 2.0 in the monthly newsletter. The dashboards I built now had new logos, new names, new owners. Every iteration presented to leadership had fewer traces of me. Once, I confronted a product manager, Jonas, after he presented one of my predictive modules as his own. He blinked at me and said, "Oh, I thought that was developed by the integration team. Isn't that part of collective IP now?" Collective IP. That phrase haunted me. At Python, collective meant the loudest voice in the room. It meant the people who scheduled the meetings, not the ones who stayed after hours cleaning up broken code. It meant managers who couldn't debug a loop claiming credit for scripts they didn't know how to run. And I let it happen. That's what haunts me the most. I didn't speak up. I kept my head down and told myself it would pay off in the long run, that eventually someone would see me. They didn't. Instead, my name was slowly pried off every contribution like a sticker peeled from glass, leaving behind only residue and denial. By the time Quinla took over the department, I was just Giovanna from Client Ops, the girl who handled onboarding, the one who updated the dashboards. Never mind that the dashboards were mine. That the engagement strategy, hailed as revolutionary in the Q3 report, was lifted line for line from the Siren briefing I had submitted 6 months earlier. My system worked too well. It became invisible. And so did I. That's the part no one prepares you for. Not the theft, not the betrayal, but the gradual soft silence that creeps in when people stop saying your name. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded in making their jobs easier. Easier to take, easier to spin, easier to forget. But I didn't forget. I saved every changelog, every time-stamped commit, every piece of metadata that bore my fingerprint, even when they tried to scrub it clean. Because I knew, deep down, that the day would come when they'd push me too far. That day came at 8:06 a.m., and as Siren locked its gates and the panic set in, all I could think was, they never knew the name of the system, but they were about to remember mine. Her name was Kira Mannix. Fresh out of grad school, brilliant, eager, all high ponytail and relentless optimism. She used to follow me around like a shadow, back when I was still allowed to lead team workshops. She called me Geo, with an affection that felt genuine. At first, I believed it was. I met Kira during a university tech panel 3 years ago. She was that one student in the front row, asking questions that were 2 layers deeper than everyone else's. After the session, she practically ran up to the stage and asked if she could shadow me during my next project. That hunger reminded me of myself. I said yes. When she joined Peton Analytics as a junior associate, I took her under my wing. I gave her access to my sandbox. Let her explore Siren's early logic models. Showed her how to map client sentiment to metadata clusters in real time. The things no one else had time to teach her, I offered freely. At first, she was gracious, grateful. She even stayed late to help me debug version conflicts during the holiday push. We talked about how isolating this field could be, how hard it was to build something beautiful in a place that only valued speed. I told her what no one had told me: document everything. She did. But not the way I meant. Kira adapted to Peton's new efficiency culture with alarming speed. Where I pushed back on Quinla's rigid directives, Kira nodded and adjusted. Where I asked questions, she executed. I watched her transform from thoughtful engineer to polished operator in less than a year. Then the emails started. At first, they were forwarded to me with little notes. "Hey Gio, thought this might interest you." But then, I started seeing her name attached to work that bore striking similarities to the models I had shared in confidence. A client clustering map I'd spent 3 months refining suddenly appeared in her quarterly report. My wording, my variable structure, even my signature phrasing for volatility index labeling, copied line by line. When I brought it up to her, casually, not accusatory, she smiled and said, "I just iterated on your draft. You laid the groundwork, obviously, but it's been optimized. You said yourself it needed pruning." She said it so calmly, so professionally, that for a moment I actually doubted my own memory. Then came the patent. Peton filed for intellectual property protection on a new version of the Siren engine, this time under the name CoreLink. It was, functionally, identical to my original build, except now it used automated feedback loops and a cloud-based retrieval system. A layer I had sketched out in the margins of my notebook, a notebook Kira had borrowed a month earlier. When I saw the filing, I scrolled quickly to the bottom. 3 authors. Quinla Brexworth, Jonah West, a director who hadn't coded since 2007, and Kira Mannix, no mention of me. Not even in the footnotes. I went to HR, calmly, document in hand. I explained that the algorithm in question was based on code I had written over the past 2 years, and I provided timestamps, commit logs, even original drafts. I didn't accuse. I just asked one thing. Please add my name to the patent. The woman across the desk, a senior compliance officer named Belinda, never looked up from her screen. "Do you have a documented agreement establishing you as the sole author of the derivative version?" "I have the original version. It's mine. Kira worked under me." "Yes," Belinda interrupted, "but under corporate law, her contributions, while employed at Peton Analytics, are considered company property, as are yours. If your contributions weren't captured in the official development sprint notes or approved commits, we can't revise attribution." "I'm sorry." She wasn't. 2 days later, I was removed from the integration team entirely. And Kira? She was promoted. Lead developer, Client Systems Initiative. Her email signature now contained the phrase co-author, Core Link Platform Patent. I walked past her office that afternoon. She was on a call, laughing. My laugh. The one she used to mimic during our late nights working. There were my flowcharts on the wall behind her, rewritten in sleek design language, as if that somehow made them hers. Later that week, she joined Quinla in a departmental town hall, presenting CoreLink to the executive team. They played a demo reel featuring client retention metrics, my metrics. Kira gestured toward the screen and said, "When we started this rebuild, I knew we had to reinvent how we relate to client behavior. I focused on streamlining predictive engagement while preserving the relational core." That was my sentence, word for word. I had written it in a pitch deck 6 months earlier. I even remembered the typo I fixed in the final draft. And still, I sat in the second row and clapped. Because what else could I do? By that point, I had already begun preparing for the possibility that none of this would be mine forever. I started backing up my original drafts to an encrypted drive. I created private logs of early code commits. I saved voice memos and time-stamped idea iterations. I did what I should have done from the beginning, not for credit, for protection. Kira thought she was ascending, that she had learned to play the game better than I ever could. What she didn't realize was that every time she activated CoreLink, she was stepping deeper into my architecture. And I had never stopped being the one holding the key. His name was Colby Vance, a perfectly marketable name for a man who treated business like a brand campaign. He arrived 3 months after Quinla was promoted into a consultancy role no one ever heard from again. Just like that, the woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation evaporated into vague LinkedIn updates about strategy workshops in Lisbon. Colby swept in like a wind tunnel full of buzzwords. He was tall, well-tailored, and always slightly too tan for someone who claimed to spend most of his days reviewing architecture documents. His hair didn't move, even during storms. His ideas did, all in the direction of investor slides and video reels with inspirational music. From the moment he stepped on stage at his first All Hands, I knew who he was. A showman, not a builder, not a thinker, a repackager. The kind of man who could sell a dream before knowing whether it had legs. And what better dream to sell than CoreLink, Peaton's miracle system, the tech that had single-handedly revolutionized their client engagement and driven a 17% uptick in renewals across 3 quarters. My tech. But to hear Colby tell it, it was the product of cross-functional alignment, visionary leadership, and relentless innovation spearheaded by our executive team. Not once did he say my name. Instead, he called out Kira with her polished smile and her suddenly camera-ready wardrobe. He thanked the product leads. He even praised the legal department for agile IP structuring. But me, I sat in the 5th row. No badge, no title, just Giovanna from that one project years ago. Until he asked for a meeting. It came through Kira, of course. Colby wants to chat with the legacy team. Give him a sense of how CoreLink evolved. Be cool. I showed up in a black sweater and jeans. No makeup, no pretending. Colby's office smelled like eucalyptus and capitalism. "Gio," he said, standing. "Mind if I call you that?" "You will anyway," I replied. He laughed, genuinely, I think, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Listen," he said, lacing his fingers behind his head. "We're pushing toward a Series D valuation in Q4, and investors are hungry for founder stories. They love a good origin myth, the whole built-in-a-basement thing. And Kira mentioned you were kind of the original architect, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "Kind of? You know how it is, iterations, collaborations. But you were early stage, and we're doing this campaign series called Roots. You'd be perfect for it. We'd film you in that first office, maybe recreate some old sketches, really humanize the brand." I stared at him. He wanted my face for the promo, not my name in the filing. Still, I nodded slowly. "Sure, but for compliance, we'll need to sign off on inventor attribution. Just something simple. Statement of origin, who developed what, timeline, that sort of thing." He waved his hand. "Absolutely. Get it to my chief of staff. I trust you." That was his mistake. 2 days later, the document hit his desk. 3 pages, clean, legal reviewed, stamped with the official Piton Analytics watermark. It laid out the development timeline of CoreLink, formerly Cyrene, and identified the original architecture as wholly conceptualized, constructed, and executed by Giovanna Eleni Feit, Employee ID 29401A, between February and November of the development year. It included all the relevant legal language. Standard IP confirmation. One clause buried in the middle, under a harmless heading. All parties acknowledge Giovanna Eleni Fite as the originating architect of the CoreLink system and sole conceptual inventor of the primary algorithmic framework. He didn't even read it. He signed on a flight to Austin right before giving a keynote about democratizing client intelligence. The document was uploaded into the compliance drive, copied to the IP vault, and filed under brand development collateral. I saved a PDF and backed it up 6 ways from Sunday. Because now I had it. His signature, their CEO. Stating under penalty of perjury that I, and I alone, was the original inventor. They thought they were using me for optics, but I had just made myself legally undeniable. From that moment on, everything changed. Not in the way that made headlines, not right away, but I began to move differently. Louder, if not visibly. Every time CoreLink was mentioned in a press release, I took note. Every time they quoted Colby saying, "our patented solution," I cataloged the language. And every time Kira smiled for the camera, I watched for the microsecond her eyes flickered downward. She knew. She had read the doc, too. They were building a rocket ship on my engine, and I had just quietly installed the eject sequence, complete with signature, timestamp, and intent. They thought I was finished, but I was just getting started. At 8:14 a.m., 14 minutes after they fired me, like I was a smudge on glass, the world I built began quietly erasing itself. Not with a bang. Not with a dramatic red screen or a fire alarm. Just a few lines of code whispering through Python analytics servers, looking for one simple condition. Status: Giovanna Eleni Fite. Inactive. It had taken me years to build Failsafe. I never called it that in the company database, of course. There, it lived as Redundancy Latch v31. But beneath that neutral name was something no one had suspected. A system within the system. Failsafe was elegant, surgical. It didn't destroy, it revoked. It didn't hack, it withdrew consent. It did what I was never allowed to do in person. Say no. At 8:14 a.m., Python's internal servers received an outbound signal from a secure third-party address. It was masked, encoded, and perfectly timed. It verified my employment status as terminated. Then it did 3 things. First, it filed the patent. The real one. The one I had prepared 2 months earlier with my private counsel, under a holding company no one at Python had ever heard of. Violetta Systems AG, based in Zurich. It listed me as the sole inventor, the architect, the original author of the dynamic relationship algorithm, known commercially as CoreLink and internally, once as Siren. A full technical filing with complete architecture documentation, diagrams, source logic, behavior maps, all time-stamped, all signed, all real. Colby's signature, the one he carelessly gave me, was appended as supplemental evidence. A CEO acknowledgement of authorship on record. Patent application submitted. Legal trail activated. Ownership locked. Second, Failsafe ran a purge. It bypassed the internal version control system, not by hacking, by calling legitimate access pathways I had embedded years ago during the original architecture phase. Admin-level channels only I could open. I'd written them in as part of debugging workflows. No one ever checked them. The moment the employment token flipped to inactive, every derivative instance of the CoreLink system, its modules, its predictive clusters, its scoring algorithms, were flagged as unauthorized. One by one, they began to vanish. Server by server, node by node. Not instantly, not in a dramatic blackout, just quietly. A dashboard here went blank. A sentiment engine returned null. Client renewal forecasts dropped to 0. The graphs disappeared. And not just at headquarters. London, Sydney, Sao Paulo. All synced, all dependent on my codebase. Everything that had been CoreLink began to fold in on itself, like scaffolding stripped of its anchor. Third, The ownership chain updated, because what Piton never understood, what Kira never noticed, even as she copied my flowcharts, was that the entire CoreLink infrastructure, from alpha through production, had been built using modular dependency hooks. Hooks I had registered to external licenses tied to my name. When failsafe activated, each dependent module lost its authorization token. They thought they owned the house. They didn't realize I held the land lease. And at 8:14 a.m., that lease expired. By 8:22, the panic had begun. I was in my car, still in the underground parking garage. I hadn't even pulled out yet, just sitting, breathing, watching the screen of my phone light up with silent signals from the system I'd spent years nurturing. CoreLink wasn't crashing, it was being reclaimed. At 8:27 a.m., a text arrived from an unknown number. "Did you mean to do this?" It was from Kira. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My hands didn't shake. I felt nothing. No anger, no thrill. Just peace. Because for the first time in years, everything that had been taken from me, rewritten, repackaged, resold, now pointed back to its origin. Me. They thought erasing me would be easy. But they forgot something fundamental about systems, and people like me. You can't delete the root without everything else falling too. The cafe was quiet. I chose the table in the back corner, by the window, just as the morning rush thinned out. I stirred cinnamon into my oat milk cappuccino, savoring the silence, the nothingness. I didn't even need to open my laptop. It found me first. At 9:02 a.m., my phone vibrated softly beside the porcelain saucer. One alert. USPTO filing Sacra 98371, A confirmed. Inventor, Giovanna Eleni, fight. 3 lines of text, that's all. But the weight of it felt like a cathedral door clicking shut behind me. It was done. The patent wasn't just filed. It was verified, public, traceable. And the world was about to see what Piton had thrown away 56 minutes earlier. I scrolled down to the auto-generated notification. Your status as sole inventor of CoreLink's dynamic relationship architecture is now officially recorded under United States Patent Filing 98371A. Confirmation codes sent to Violetta Systems AG. At 9:04 a.m., my name was attached, publicly, legally, irrefutably, to the system they built their quarterly projections on. And across town, in a conference room, likely filled with graphs and fake smiles, someone had just clicked refresh on their licensing dashboard and found nothing but a 404 error, blinking like a silent scream. At 9:07, the first internal memo leaked. A screenshot, anonymously forwarded to a former colleague, then posted on a semi-private Slack channel. The subject line read, "Urgent. Inventor discrepancy in CoreLink patent filing. IP conflict detected." By 9:12, a tweet thread from Aus Startup Sleuth was going viral. Developing. Piton Analytics fires developer behind their flagship tech. 14 minutes before she was officially awarded the sole patent. You can't make this up. Giant tech reckoning. CoreLink collapse. At 9:26, I was tagged in an article on TechPulse. The 14-minute mistake. How one company fired its future. My photo, one I didn't know existed, had been pulled from an old team blog post. I looked younger, hopeful. Someone had sharpened the image and overlaid it with the words, "They erased her. She rewrote the ending." At 9:33, a CNBC anchor leaned into the camera and said my name aloud. Giovanna Fight, a systems architect dismissed without warning, is now confirmed as the sole inventor of the technology powering Piton Analytics' CoreLink platform. The fallout, financial and reputational, is already underway. They showed the footage. Piton's HQ entrance swarmed with cameras, executives ushered into black sedans, phones pressed to ears. A new headline slid across the screen. Piton shares drop 22%. Amid IP scandal, I sipped my cappuccino slowly. The foam had started to collapse, but the cinnamon lingered. At 10:01 a.m., a former investor in Piton posted this on LinkedIn. We believed in the system. Turns out, the system belonged to someone else, and she was the only part they didn't value. By 10:22, Piton's press office issued a statement. Too little, too late. We are actively investigating discrepancies in recent intellectual property filings. We have nothing but respect for Ms. Feit's contributions. I almost laughed. Respect? They couldn't spell my name 2 weeks ago. Then the call started. Not from lawyers, from other companies. Inquiries, consultations, media requests. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted to license CoreLink directly from me, because I was no longer the woman they let go. I was now the inventor, the woman who had walked away and taken the core with her. And as the media buzzed and Piton bled, I sat there, calm and still. Because all of this, it wasn't revenge. It was the natural consequence of what happens when you fire the system's heartbeat and expect it to keep breathing. It came at 12:41 p.m. Just over 4 hours after they fired me, and just under 3 since their panic hit headlines. The email subject line was as polished as a diplomatic handshake. Piton strategic proposal. Confidential, the body was less subtle. Giovanna, in light of recent developments, we wish to propose an immediate resolution. Piton Analytics formally offers to acquire full rights to the CoreLink patent, USPTO filing Sector 9837-A, for a sum of $8 million USD, effective upon transfer of ownership. The proposal includes a 2-year strategic consultancy agreement, during which you would retain a senior advisory title, office access, and an enhanced stock option plan. We believe this represents a fair and generous acknowledgement of your contributions. We are eager to move forward together. Please respond by EOD to initiate legal review. It wasn't even signed by Colby. It came from someone in Global Business Affairs. $8 million, 2 years, an office, a title, recognition, finally. The kind that comes when they're afraid, not when they believe in you. I stared at the blinking cursor of my reply box, then typed 6 words. Thank you. I respectfully decline. Giovanna E. Fight no emotion. No punctuation flourish. Just clarity. They had missed their chance the moment they treated me like a removable part. You can't buy back what you discarded. Not when it's grown roots elsewhere. At 1:03 p.m., I received a different email. No legal jargon, no bullet points. Just a subject line. Let's build something better. It was from Anders Holt, co-founder of Callus Origin Systems, a rising star in adaptive machine learning. We'd crossed paths once, years ago, when he gave a guest lecture on sustainable AI frameworks. I remembered his closing words. Hire people whose ethics write better code than their fingers. Now he was writing to me. Giovanna, you probably don't remember me, but I remember Siren. I remember the old white paper you submitted to the Open Systems Roundtable in 22, the one everyone ignored. I didn't. We've watched Piton fumble your work for a year. We always knew the system wasn't theirs. Not really. If you're open to it, we'd like to meet. Not for a buyout, for leadership. We want you as our CTO. Full autonomy over architecture, visionary level control. The floor is yours. Build what you couldn't build at Piton. Let us value you before we have to regret not doing so. My breath caught. Not because of the role, not even because of the title, but because they saw me. Not as a temporary asset, not as someone to neutralize or silence, as the architect, the one who never needed permission, only opportunity. At 1:07 p.m., I replied, let's meet, I'm ready. And I was. Not just for the job, for the next era, because I hadn't waited 4 years to be bought back. I'd waited 4 years to build something that couldn't be stolen. The smartest revenge isn't loud. It's licensed. At 9:18 a.m. the next morning, less than 24 hours after I turned down Piton's $8 million hush package, I sat in the glass conference room of Callus Origin Systems. No NDAs. No whispering. Just Anders Holt across the table, hands folded, watching me outline a plan that had been forming in the back of my mind long before Piton ever knew I'd left. I wasn't going to sell CoreLink, I was going to split it. Not literally. The algorithm remained intact, untouched, and secure. But the licensing, that would be the beauty of it. Instead of exclusive rights to a single buyer, I would license CoreLink to 3 carefully selected, non-competing companies. 3 different industries. 3 different applications. 1 common clause. No collaboration or subcontracting with Peyton Analytics, its subsidiaries, or any current contractual partners. Non-negotiable. It wasn't vindictive. It was surgical. A wall, invisible and airtight, around the empire they had tried to build on my back. The first license went to Lyrian Health Tech, a mid-size firm pivoting toward behavioral analytics for telehealth providers. They'd been struggling to translate human engagement into predictive models. CoreLink's sentiment engine? Perfect fit. The second deal landed with Savrologics, a supply chain disruptor specializing in predictive warehousing. They didn't need the relationship aspect, just the probability matrix at the algorithm's core. Within weeks, their route failures dropped by 42%. The third? Novavox Interactive, a VR company integrating AI-powered feedback systems into immersive learning. They needed emotional mapping to adapt content to users in real time. Different fields, same benefit. CoreLink, or rather what it used to be, now lived in 3 verticals that didn't touch Peyton's sphere. And every one of those contracts included my custom clause, buried 2/3 down in the legal language, worded so cleanly that no executive would blink. Client agrees that during the full term of license, they will not engage in any direct or indirect cooperation, development, or consultation with Peyton Analytics or any of its affiliates. This includes white label services, cross-functional partnerships, data exchanges, or silent subcontracting. Nothing aggressive, nothing litigious, just preventative. By the time Peyton realized they were frozen out, the ink was dry. 3 contracts, 3 active integrations, 3 new clients benefiting from the very architecture Peyton claimed to own, while being legally barred from touching it again. No court hearings, no subpoenas, just business. I didn't need to take them to court, I just made them irrelevant. At 11:43 a.m., a message from an insider at Peyton slipped into my inbox. Anonymous, but clearly someone on the tech team. They're trying to rebuild from scratch. No backup of your predictive model. They can't replicate the churn engine. They're weeks from panic mode. I read it over coffee. No thrill, no gloating. Just that same calm hum I'd felt when the patent notification first lit up my screen. Because I wasn't here to destroy them. I was here to replace them. And it had already begun. Rain whispered against the windshield as I sat across the street from the place that had once tried to erase me. Peyton Analytics stood tall as ever, its mirrored glass panels catching gray reflections of the overcast sky, the rain rolling down like the building itself was sweating. Funny how little the outside changes, even when everything inside has collapsed. I hadn't planned this visit. Not officially. No calendar invite, no security badge. Just a quiet instinct that said, now, today. Go. I wasn't there for confrontation or a show. I didn't need an audience. I didn't even need them to speak. I needed them to see. I stepped out into the drizzle, the weight of my coat anchoring me in place with every step toward the doors. I wasn't nervous. I felt precise. Like a scalpel. Cold, yes, but surgical. Necessary. The lobby was exactly as I remembered it. Polished floors. The same receptionist with the corporate smile that never reached her eyes. The same faint lemon scent from whatever industrial cleaner they used on Monday mornings. She glanced up as I approached. Can I help? Just delivering something, I said, calm but firm. Won't take long. I moved past her before she could ask more. My steps carried me straight to the elevators, and I pressed the button for the 7th floor without a second thought. That floor used to hum. It was once the beating heart of client systems, the war room for CoreLink's early iterations, the space where I stayed long after everyone else had left, scribbling feedback maps on whiteboards no one read. Now, silence, an eerie stillness. I could feel the absence of energy like a cold spot in a warm room. I passed familiar desks. The configuration had changed slightly, like they were trying to rebrand dysfunction with ergonomic chairs and rearranged furniture. It didn't help. The rot was still there. Not in the furniture, but in the way people looked up at me. They recognized me now. Not as that girl from client ops, but as her. The woman who owned the system. The woman they'd fired. The woman who had smiled and walked, and taken the future with her. No one said anything. One man looked up and quickly looked away. Good. I kept walking. Kira's office, glass-walled, sharp-lined, was empty. The whiteboard behind her desk was cluttered with notes, but none of them glowed with the elegance I once taught her to chase. She hadn't replaced me. She'd only tried to replicate me. I turned the corner to the wall where the old team nameplates were still mounted. Brushed silver rectangles with small black screws and plastic name cards. My slot was still there. Empty. For 22 days, they'd left it blank. Either no one had claimed it, or no one dared. I reached into my bag and pulled out the slim metal plate I had made myself. Identical size, same font. But beneath my name, 3 words etched in soft gray. Giovanna E. Fight inventor. Architect. Original. I pressed it into the slot and heard the faint click of it locking into place. There. No ceremony, no applause, just a quiet correction of history. I stood there for a moment, fingers grazing the edges. It wasn't about territory. It was about truth. My name didn't belong in a footnote or a revision log or buried in someone else's citation. It belonged here, in plain sight. I took the elevator back down. The receptionist was still staring at her monitor, but I caught her eye this time and held her gaze. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a sleek brushed steel USB drive. Heavy, polished, precise. On the side, engraved in the same font as the nameplate, failsafe, retired. I placed it gently on the counter. For Mr. Vance, I said softly. Personal delivery, no rush. She picked it up, confused, flipping it between her fingers. Should I log your name? No need, I said, already turning toward the doors. He'll know exactly who it's from. As I stepped outside into the soft rain, I could still feel the heat of their stares behind glass walls. Let them wonder. Let them sit with it. There was no data on the drive. No source code. Just a simple text file, locked and read only. Next time, read what you sign. No threat. No venom. Just a reminder. They had tried to erase me, replace me, and they had failed at every turn, not because I fought them, but because they never truly understood what they'd had. You don't erase an architect with a meeting. You don't replace a foundation with a spreadsheet. You don't fire someone whose name lives in every root file your system still pretends to run on. As I walked down the block, the rain sliding over my shoulders, I allowed myself a rare smile. Not smug, not cruel. Satisfied. Because I hadn't burned the building. I'd simply taken the blueprint with me. And they would never build the same way again. I remember the exact moment I asked. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices. Just me, a USB full of proof, and a calm, calculated request. I had stepped into the HR compliance office, holding a printout of my architecture tree, time-stamped commits, user logs, early iteration notes. Everything. Evidence that what they called Core Link had been Siren first. And Siren had been mine. Belinda, the compliance officer, didn't even look up from her monitor. I just want my name added to the patent, I said gently. Nothing more. She typed something, probably an email, not even about me, and replied in that flat voice reserved for policy denials. There's no provision for post-signature authorship reassignment, and no individual developer is typically credited in proprietary filings. It's collective property under employment doctrine. She didn't say, "You don't matter." But the silence that followed said everything she didn't have the spine to. I stood there for a few seconds, absorbing it. Then I nodded, packed up my folder, and walked out. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Because what they didn't understand, what Belinda, Quinla, Kira, and every blinkered executive failed to see, was that silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is simply a pause before the storm. And now, that storm had arrived. 3 companies were already running CoreLink, or their own versions, adapted and improved from the foundation I'd designed. Not copies, not clones. Evolution. Real integration. Real impact. Lyrian HealthTech's CEO had gone on record calling the system transformative. Savrologix published a white paper outlining how predictive routing reduced waste by 29% in just 5 weeks. Novavox Interactive? Their adaptive VR modules were the talk of the developer circuit, and every single one of those systems traced back to one name: mine. Meanwhile, Piton Analytics was rotting from the inside. Investor memos leaked onto Reddit. Excerpts from board calls hit Twitter, where startup vultures circled like hawks. They let her go 14 minutes before the patent was filed. No backups, no roadmap, no redundancy. How do you fire the person holding the key? Stock forums that once hyped Piton as a sleeper unicorn now posted memes of Colby holding an empty briefcase. One comment went viral. She was the operating system. They just unplugged her. I never replied. Never fed the fire. I didn't need to. Because every time someone searched CoreLink, my name surfaced. Every podcast, every tech panel, every think piece that started with, "in a stunning move," they all came back to one truth. They could erase my badge. But they couldn't erase the blueprint. And the internet? The internet loves a reckoning. People remembered. They found old documentation. They archived timelines. One brilliant stranger compiled a thread of every internal memo from Piton that referenced collaborative system enhancements, matched them to my timestamps, and titled it, "How to Steal a System and Lose Your Company." It had 2.7 million views in 36 hours. Piton didn't implode. It dissolved. Quietly, shamefully, no lawsuits, no press conferences, just clients leaving, contracts pulled, job postings quietly disappearing from their website. And me. I was already 4 steps ahead, whiteboarding the next evolution of CoreLink at Callus, shaping a vision with people who didn't ask for proof of my brilliance. They'd already seen it. Because power doesn't always explode. Sometimes it reclaims. Silently. Strategically. Completely. And all I'd ever asked for was my name. Now it's everywhere. Victory doesn't sound the way I thought it would. I used to imagine it loud. Explosive. Headlines, boardroom collapses, maybe even someone crying in an executive washroom while muttering my name in regret. The kind of cinematic justice we grow up craving when we're forced to swallow our voices in meetings where someone else repeats our idea. Louder and with a smile. But that's not what it feels like now. Now it feels like silence, but not the kind they used to weaponize against me. This silence is sacred. It's the kind of quiet that follows truth, not pain. The silence of no longer needing to prove anything. The silence of peace. I feel it most on slow mornings, when the office lights haven't fully warmed up yet, and the only sound is the soft murmur of someone 2 doors down, pouring coffee. I sit at my desk, my own desk, and listen to it. No tension in my shoulders. No waiting for a tap on the glass. No fear of being called into a meeting under the banner of collaboration, only to be told someone else will handle the final messaging. Those days are over. And the world didn't need to burn for me to rise. I didn't have to scream, or sue, or wage war. I simply took my name back. And when I did, everything else followed. People think survival means clinging to the wreckage. But I didn't just survive. I swam to shore, dried off, and built the damn island. At Callus, I'm not just the CTO. I'm the blueprint. They don't bring me in at the end of a project to add insight. I design the structure from the first line. No one asks who deserves credit. It's assumed. It's baked in. Not because they worship me, but because here, my presence isn't up for negotiation. I look around at my team, a constellation of talent they once would have dismissed. Aya, the brilliant developer, who never spoke up in meetings at Piton because someone always cut her off. She runs integration now. John Mark, the data scientist Piton, labeled too academic, leads our modeling unit. His theories, once brushed aside, now power real-time adaptive learning modules that companies are begging to license. Even Kira, yes, that Kira, reached out not long ago. The message was tentative, not groveling, just human. I see now. I was afraid of being invisible, so I stepped on the person who showed me how to shine. I'm sorry, truly. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, because I didn't need to. Forgiveness, I've learned, is often unnecessary when you're no longer living in the wound. The most beautiful part of this new life? No one can erase me now. My name lives on contracts, on citations, in patent databases and academic journals, and in places that matter more, in classrooms, in conversations, in the minds of young women who look at my journey and say, I don't have to wait for permission. I see it in the intern who asked me during her first week, how did you stay quiet for so long? And I answered honestly, because I thought I had to earn my seat. But I built the table, and they made me think it was borrowed. Not anymore. They taught me to be small, precise, useful, replaceable, and I became vast, strategic, irreplaceable. This victory is not the kind you toast with champagne or shout from rooftops. It doesn't roar. It rests. It listens. It breathes. It fills the room with a kind of weightless certainty that says, you are no longer waiting to be seen. You are the one doing the seeing now. You are no longer an afterthought in someone else's report. You are the author of your own system. Not just a system of code, a system of belief, of self-worth, of justice that does not need applause to be real. In this silence, there is no noise of doubt, no echo of the voices that tried to shrink me, just the soft hum of a future that finally, irrevocably, belongs to me. And in that quiet, I begin again.